Assalamualaikum everyone. How are you guys? I hope you all are fine and taking super care of yourselves as well as your family. So I would really like to thank you all for viewing and subscribing my channel as well as liking it. So let's start up. Before we start our YouTube session, I want to tell you that today Fatma would not be available because she is a little busy. But for this YouTube video, I will be only available. So first, let me share my screen with you guys and let's begin. Okay, so this is our video for our main motive for today. We will be reading a book by Charles Dickens, which is for grade 6 to 7, The Christmas or A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. I don't know who he is, but let me give you a short description. Charles Dickens was a British novelist, journalist, editor, illustrator, and social commentator, who wrote such beloved classic novels as Oliver Twist, A Christmas Carol, Nicholas Nickleby, David Copperfield, A Tale of Two Cities, Great Expectations. Charles Dickens did not have a bright future. He had to leave school and had to work for most hours of the day. So as we all say that picture or video speak better than words, so I have a video for you guys which I think would explain you guys who Charles Dickens was. So let's start up.
Charles John Huffam Dickens was born on the 7th of February 1812 to John and Elizabeth Dickens. Charles was the second child of 8 siblings in all, 6 of whom survived to adulthood. John, a naval clerk, always spent beyond his means. One day he pointed out a house to Charles, remarking that he could live in such a house if he worked hard. The family moved to London in 1822. At 12, as the family finances worsened, Charles had to start work in a blacking factory, labelling bottles for 11 hours a day. John Dickens was eventually sent to a debtor's prison. Charles visited him there every Sunday. His youth left him with an ambitious drive. In 1827 he began work as a solicitor's clerk. From the surroundings of his unremarkable office, he began to collect names and characteristics of the people he saw. Charles began a journalistic career in 1831. Writing became his passion, working for the paper by day and on his own work by night. He was beginning to taste success. His first piece of fiction was published in 1835. That same year, Charles met Catherine Hogarth. They fell in love and were married. The next few years of fervent activity resulted in much writing and many children. As his writing became more popular and his fame more widespread, rumours began to abound of his drunkenness and admission to an asylum. Stories were easy to concoct about the writer, who kept a pet raven, and whose writing dealt in the extremes of the sentimental and the grotesque. In 1842, Charles and Catherine set sail for America. On landing in Boston, they were mobbed by crowds. Dickens' interest lay in visiting the unusual, which inspired his writing. He took his whole family on his next big trip to Italy in the summer of 1844. Upon his return, Dickens began to look for new diversions. He helped to start and edit a radical newspaper, founded a refuge for homeless women, and performed his works at public readings. Aged 44, Charles bought Gad's Hill, the house his father had pointed out to him all those years before. It symbolised a pinnacle of achievement. Whilst Dickens was organising a theatrical project, The Frozen Deep, he met and was spellbound by a young actress, Ellen Ternan. There is much speculation about this relationship that caused the end of his marriage to Catherine. One fateful night in 1865, whilst Charles and Ellen were returning from Paris, their train crashed outside Staplehurst. Dickens administered brandy and water to the injured and dying. Only at the last minute did he remember to retrieve the final part of Our Mutual Friend from the wrecked carriage. The incident left Charles very shaken. For a while he maintained his busy itinerary, then his health began to fail. At home on Wednesday the 9th of June 1870, at the age of 58, Charles suffered a stroke and died. He's buried in Westminster Abbey.
So guys, did you like the video? I enjoyed it, and I think that it gave you a lot of information about our author of the book, Charles Dickens. A Christmas Carol. So this is the cover in my my first slide. So this book has different covers. Okay, don't get confused. The book blurb. Reading the book blurb is very important because it tells you what is a very short summary, like what is actually the book about. So let's read it. Go on, ghostly journey with Ebenezer Scrooge. Old man Scrooge had no friends or family to love him. He's just miserable and bitter. One freezing cold summer eve, Marley Ghost pays Scrooge a visit and takes him on an eerie nighttime journey. The Christmas spirits show how Scrooge, the error of his nasty ways, by visiting the past, present, and future. Will Scrooge learn to love Christmas and everyone around him? So, these are a type of horror and haunting type of feeling, some mystery type of feeling. So, this book genre is a realistic fiction and horror. This is the main thing. This is a Christmas Carol video for you guys, which I have done for you. And this is very important because this is the whole main part of the. This is the main part of the. You can say the main part of this video, this YouTube video. So let's start off. I'm so excited. I hope you guys will enjoy this. Wait a second.
One New Year's Eve, people were running around trying to make it somewhere. The stingy old grumpy man, Mr. Scrooge, was looking out the window from his workplace.
What nonsense! All these people running around in the cold. I hate New Year's Eve.
Mr. Scrooge sat at his table and began to check the list of all the people that owed him money. With hesitation, his helper approached him and asked,
Is it possible that I leave a little early today? You know, it's New Year's Eve and I must buy my son a present. No, you may not, Mr. Present. How ridiculous. And why leave it to the last day? You should have bought it earlier.
With great sadness, his helper returned to work. At that very moment, the door knocked. As grumpy as himself, his dog barked at the door. Mr. Scrooge's helper opened the door. His young nephew had come to visit him. He invited him over to the New Year's dinner. But because Mr. Scrooge didn't like New Year's, and he thought that the celebrations were nonsense, once again, like always, he refused to go. After his nephew had left, his door knocked again.
Oh, what now? Leave me alone so I can work.
This time, 2 men entered and asked if it was possible for him to donate some money to the orphans. Mr. Scrooge refused to give them money.
Go now. Go. Go to another door. I have no money to throw on the streets.
With great sadness, the men walked out. Later that evening, Mr. Scrooge went home, wore his pyjamas, and sat on his couch. And right that moment, some strange things began to happen. Windows and doors began to swing. There were howling noises coming from the door and scary sounds all around. The dog began to bark once again. At first, Mr. Scrooge didn't take any notice of this, but then all of a sudden a ghost appeared right in front of him. Mr. Scrooge had never been so frightened in his whole entire life. The ghost was his friend from work, who had just passed away. With great difficulty, Mr. Scrooge spoke.
You, but how can it be? You died. Go, get away from me. Leave me alone. I haven't done anything wrong.
The ghost's hands and feet were in shackles. He told Mr. Scrooge, due to his selfishness and greediness, he was punished and that his punishment was to walk around the world in shackles. And so he warned Mr. Scrooge not to make the same mistake he did.
You go and mind your own business. You're dead. There you have it. Okay then. Just wanted to warn you. 3 other ghosts will visit you. One of them will show you your past, the other your present, and the last one will show you your future life.
Mr. Scrooge acted as if none of this had happened and headed off to bed. Soon after, a light caught his eye. When Mr. Scrooge opened his eyes, a child ghost appeared. It was the ghost from last year's New Year's Eve. Mr. Scrooge was stunned. Now we will take a little trip to the past.
Oh, what's happening? Help!
The ghost took Mr. Scrooge back to his childhood years. And there it was, Mr. Scrooge as a child, with his friends in the schoolyard, decorating the tree like a Christmas tree. The kids were having so much fun. You could tell child Mr. Scrooge was very happy. Later on, the ghost took him to his first boss's house when he was a young man. They were having great time with his boss and his family. Mr. Scrooge's wife was also there. Together they were dancing and having so much fun. And at last the ghost took Mr. Scrooge back to another New Year's Eve, which was in the past, but later on in his life. His wife began to cry. Before we used to have so much fun. You used to care for me and love me, but now all you love is money. I have no room in your life anymore. I think we should part. Not being able to stand the sight of this, Mr. Scrooge asked the ghost to take him back. And suddenly he was home. This time round, a giant green-coloured ghost appeared in front of him. Now Mr. Scrooge was even more scared. It was this year's New Year's ghost.
Come with me. Let's see what's happening this New Year's Eve.
Before he had any time to refuse, he found himself in his helper's home. In his poor helper's home was a very simple dinner table. Mr. Scrooge thought that everyone in the family hated him. Then he saw that this actually wasn't the case. His helper stood up and started to talk.
I want to thank Mrs. Scrooge for giving me the opportunity to work and for paying me on time. We're able to eat because of him.
Even though Mr. Scrooge was nasty to his helper at every chance he got, he was amazed at how thankful he was. Later he noticed his helper's sick child. The kid was sitting in his wheelchair at the top corner of the table. He looked thin and sick. Mr. Scrooge was very sad for the child.
This child is very ill and hasn't got much time left.
After hearing this, Mr. Scrooge's sadness grew bigger. Later on, the ghost took him to his nephew's home. All his family was having so much fun eating. They even had an empty seat waiting for him.
Wish Uncle was here with us.
Mr. Scrooge did not expect to see this.
He always thought that his whole family had hated him.
At that moment, the ghost told him that it was time for him to die and revealed two kids standing under his jacket. It was a girl and a boy. But with their skinny figures and scary faces, they looked more like two old skeletons than kids.
Pay attention to these kids. They represent greedy and unconcerned people. When it is time for you to die, pay special attention to the boy.
The giant green ghost also disappeared. Mr. Scrooge did not quite understand what the ghost was trying to say, but suddenly he startled with the sound of the clock. It was midnight. This time, there appeared a darker and scarier ghost in front of him. This one was the ghost of the future. He brought Mr. Scrooge to his own funeral. People were gathered at his grave in a graveyard. Mr. Scrooge was shocked when he saw his face on his gravestone. He saw that people were talking behind his back, and how they were relieved that he was finally gone. That moment, Mr. Scrooge realized that over the years, he had become an even worse person and nobody liked him anymore. People who owed him money were happy with his death. And he saw his helper's son's grave.
Unlike his son's grave was full of flowers.
He could not stand to see it anymore. He asked the ghost to take him back.
Please take me back. Now I understand. I'm going to change the way I live. I'm not going to be that stingy old grumpy man. I promise you.
Suddenly, he was home. Luckily, the time wasn't 12 yet. His dog began to bark. Mr. Scrooge noticed it was still that same day. He still had time to change some things. With great happiness, he jumped out onto the street. First, he visited the butcher. He bought a big turkey and asked if he could take it to his helper's home. Then he bought a toy and asked if they could take it to his helper's son. Then he ran and went to his brother's house. He joined the dinner his nephew had invited him to. That night, they all had a great New Year's Eve together. Later on, he made sure his helper's son got the treatment he needed. He treated him as if he was his own son. He helped the poor. He got along with people better and treated them with warmth. He was never rude, selfish, or stingy, and nothing was ever going to be the same.
So, did you guys see and enjoy? I did. It was so fun. Okay, so now let's discuss some important points. Mr. Scrooge was an old, grumpy man who did not like Christmas. That's the yeah. Who did not like Christmas. He was very mean and rich. He never gave money to any orphanage. In fact, he took the money right back, which right away, which he owed to them. If someone was even a second late, he would take everything from that person. So how mean and grumpy he was. He had a friend just like him named Marley. He was dead now. One Christmas Eve, on the Christmas Eve, Marley's ghost appeared and warned him that due to his greediness and selflessness, he was punished to walk around the earth with shuttles. Oh, how did he spell? It was shuttles. He also told that day 3 ghosts will visit him. The first one would show Mr. Scrooge's past, the second his present, and the third his future. This is a continuation. On Christmas Eve day, his servant came that if he could go home early, as he had to buy a gift for his son, but Mr. Scrooge refused to him. Later, his nephew came to invite him for dinner, but he refused too. Then some people came from the orphanage to collect some charity. He became more aggressive and refused to them too. You remember? He told the people that that go away. I don't have money to throw on street. So that is some aggressiveness, right? When the first ghost came, he showed his past. He means the ghost. His past where he, as a child, playing and having fun. Scrooge was then taken to where he was with his wife. The ghost took him where his wife was crying. He couldn't see it anymore and asked him to take him back. Then another ghost appeared. He showed him the present. Then he went to his servant's house, where he saw his ill-beaten son and felt very sad. Then his servant stood up. Then his servant felt very sad. Then his servant stood up and said that he was very thankful to Mr. Scrooge. Mr. Scrooge was very shocked that he was so nasty to him, and so then his servant, his helper, was really thankful to him. Next he went to his nephew's house, where he saw that the seat was waiting for him. Then the last ghost came, who showed his future. There everyone was happy that Scrooge had died. The people who he owed his money laughed. Just beside him there was the grave of his servant's child. Unlike his grave, it was filled with plants and flowers. Scrooge could not see any more and requested him to take a Scrooge or him back, and also promised the ghost that he would not remain grumpy anymore. Suddenly he was at home, and luckily it was the still same day. He jumped on the road to a chicken shop and bought a turkey, and asked if they could give it to his servant's house as well as the toy he bought. Then he also ran to his nephew's house and joined them for dinner. Mr. Scrooge had now changed. He was no more grumpy and mean. He also gave most of his money to the charity and spent much on the poor. He also promised his servant that he would make sure he would make sure that his son gets the best treatment he needs. So thank you guys for watching my video and having, I don't know, you had fun. But please, I think you had fun, and so please. Thank you. Alright girls, please subscribe, like and comment. So have some questions related to this or the previous video. You can email me or us at shoaibiman1 or shoaibiman2009 @gmail.com. You can view these Gmail accounts or email accounts on your screen right now. So see you soon. Bye. Allah Hafiz.